Well, up next this holiday season, reporter Linda Moulton Howe joins us with some incredible stories of high strangeness. When we come back in just a moment on Coast to Coast with Linda, we will start by talking about her story of the asteroid YU55 and what it all means. That's next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie, and Linda Moulton Howe is with us. Linda, happy holidays to you. How are you?
Well, do you know that we are in 50, 60-mile-an-hour gusts and snow here tonight yet again?
Oh, never stops.
Well, the 7 years I've been in Albuquerque, it's never been like this at Christmas time. It is really blizzardy, and we need snowpack. But, wow, I mean, these are like Midwest blizzards here.
Be careful what you wish for, Linda.
I know, but everything is twinkly and white, and it's been fun to be indoors talking with scientists and all kinds of people on the stories that I'd like to share tonight with our Coast audience, starting with this question about asteroid YU55 that went between the Earth and the Moon November 8th at its closest. And since that time, and this is December 22nd, about to go into the 23rd,
okay,
there had been not a single other image released since November 7th, not the 8th, 9th, and 10th, November 7th, those little video frames.
Strange, isn't it?
And I started getting all kinds of questions from viewers. Where is this asteroid close up? And tonight you're going to hear from Dr. Lance Benner at JPL NASA about how Goldstone this time around had improved equipment that would be able to look at this asteroid with a clarity 5 times more than before, a much tighter pixel range. So I have been expecting and excited about seeing these new, brand new, improved resolutions. Well, here in brief is what has happened. I just in the past 5 days received some information from a Kentucky resident, very nice, who picking up on the question about where are the YU55 images, especially about these puzzling structures as Dr. Benner described them.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to her congressman, Ed Whitfield in Kentucky, and asked. And they went to JPL NASA and asked, where are the radar images from November 8th, 9th, and 10th? And only in the last couple of days, here was a first answer from the congressman's office given to the congressman from NASA JPL. This is a quote. NASA was unable to capture images of 2005 YU55 using radar on November 8th due to the rapid angle of motion of the object across the sky at the time, close quote. And in a separate phone conversation, the Kentucky resident was told that the images were blurred, and that was the word used, blurred because of the motion and speed of the asteroid, close quote. Well, this was very puzzling. I sent that to an astrophysicist and asked for his input, and he thought that that was not at all what he would have expected because he is very familiar with other telescopes beyond Goldstone and Arecibo that probably should have been able to get photographs. Well, I put the email from the congressman's office directly to Dr. Lance Benner, and only tonight I received this email. Hi, Linda. Briefly, there were not any Goldstone observations scheduled on November 8th, but we did observe 2005 YU55 early on November 9th, and those observations went well. We posted more images on the 2005 YU55 Goldstone observations planning page recently, and they are available for anyone to view. And I now have these added to my earthfiles.com news report tonight. I had not heard of this. These are brand new to me, and I've got strips up at Earth Files in this report so that you can see the November 10th Goldstone images, and they are in two different strips at two different angles to the asteroid. And then he added this from Dr. Benner. There were bistatic Arecibo Green Bank telescope observations on November 8th that had equipment problems with one of the data-taking computers at Green Bank. I was not directly involved, so I don't know the details, but shortly the observations concluded, I heard that someone still has radar images. But the bottom line is, tonight, as of December 22nd going into the 23rd, no one may have November 8th close-up images. And how this would happen, to me, doesn't make any sense. And I emailed also to Dr. Benner to ask about the pointy hill features that he said were in this asteroid strip. But I couldn't tell in the strip, so I asked if it was a little object that you can see protruding in the lower left in these images. And he said in an email, no, it's at the top of the images. It's pretty small. It's only about 20 meters or 100 feet high. So we have what right now has been released from Goldstone, but strangely, there may not be any images from November 8th in its closest. And this is going to be very interesting to see if November 8th images show up to the public. And if not, why wouldn't anyone have had good images on the November 8th when it was closest? So that's part of the mystery, and you will hear tonight, as I talk with Dr. Benner, I talk with him first on November 30th for an interview, and he told me that at that time they were sampling data at 40 million times a second and had accumulated 40 terabytes of data. Now, when I ask him about the puzzling structures on YU55, then we're going to start in an interview with Dr. Benner as he is addressing, at the time, the only image that any of us had, which was from November 7th, when the asteroid was 860,000 miles away. By November 8th, it passed between the Earth and the Moon very close. So he and I, in this interview, only have in front of us at the time the November 7th images. And now here is Dr. Lance Benner, Ph.D., planetary scientist with NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California.
This particular asteroid, YU55, has a bulge or a ridge near its equator. But we didn't expect to see it in something that's rotating with a rotation period of about 16 hours. Most objects that have that kind of feature are much more rapidly rotating, between 2 and 4 hours. So not something we would have expected. The other asteroids where we've seen this kind of feature, the best explanation that we currently have is that an object was spinning rapidly, and that in combination with a very porous rubble pile internal structure enabled material to move outward and produce that kind of structure.
What would be an example of another asteroid that shows an equatorial ridge?
Binary asteroid 1999 KW4, based on some work that we published in the journal Science in 2006. And it has a really pronounced bulge at its equator. That was really the first pronounced example of this. It's an asteroid that rotates with a period of slightly less than 3 hours. It's about 1 mile across, 1.5 kilometers in diameter. Really pronounced bulge at its equator. And YU55, there's a distinct signature of it in the radar images that we got. In addition to some images that came out after the press release, we see some other small-scale topography that I don't recall ever seeing on any of our asteroid images before. There's a rather sharp, pointy little, might be a hill, it's not entirely clear, on the top of the images that we obtained on November 10th. We don't really understand yet what those are, or what that is. There's one in particular that sticks up. Just looking at it, it appears to be somewhere in the realm of 20 to 30 meters above the surrounding topography. But it's a bit of a puzzle. It could simply be a large block on the surface, or maybe there's something else. I'm not sure what that is. That's one example of some of the things that we've seen that we don't really understand.
So far, have you gotten any clear radar images of this 20 to 30 meter object that extends above the surface?
Well, it appears in a number of images on November 10th. Just looking at the images, it's something that pokes up above the surroundings. And we can clearly see that it's higher topographically than the areas adjacent to it. But we don't really know in detail what it is. My suspicion is that when we do the full three-dimensional shape reconstruction is that it'll simply be a bump on the surface that pokes up. As to why there would be such a feature, that's not entirely clear. But there it is.
Do you have any radar image of this that I can use?
Well, we haven't released it yet. At this point, I'm not sure we're really going to do any more press releases. We've done quite a few already.
But I haven't seen any new images since your November 7th press releases.
Well, we've released. Let's see. There was that first image on November 7th, and then there were two different animations. One that consisted of 6 individual frames on November 7th. And there was a longer one, I think, that had more than 20 frames. That was also from November 7th. That showed more rotation than the earlier one did.
I saw those, but I thought they were all older images before the closest passage occurred on November 8th.
Well, we haven't released any of the images. We've actually been processing the data. We got a lot of data, taking quite a while to process.
When do you think you will be able to release the radar images from YU55's closest approach to Earth?
Well, normally the way we do this is not in the form of a press release. It's normally in the form of putting together a scientific paper for a scientific journal. In this particular instance, I think there's a pretty good chance that we will provide another animation. At Goldstone, we have a new imaging system which has enabled us to improve the level of detail that we can see by a factor of 5. And so this is the first asteroid where we've been able to take full advantage of that new capability and get very highly detailed images. By very highly detailed, what I mean is the resolution of these images is 4 meters per pixel. These are the finest resolution radar images ever obtained for an asteroid in this kind of size category because we have this new imaging capability at Goldstone. So again, the resolution is 4 meters, which is about 12 or 13 feet. Very, very fine resolution. That's actually finer than the resolution of some of the NASA spacecraft that have flown by comets in recent years. So that's something we've never been able to do before. But we do image a number of asteroids throughout the course of the year, combined at both Goldstone and Arecibo.
Right, but it was because this came so close between the Earth and the Moon, everybody would like to see what it looks like. And I'm just curious, when would, let's say, myself in the media, when would I be able to have an image or images that can show what this looks like and what that 30-meter knob looks like and so forth?
Well, as I said, we're probably going to do another release with another animation. I don't know the specific date for that. I really appreciate your interest in it. It's wonderful to see that there is this much interest.
Yes, there really is. And I'm curious, if you do another NASA JPL animation, will you have November 8th, 9th, and 10th radar images in it?
We haven't really decided, which day we're going to do next. As I said, it's been taking quite a bit of effort to process all the data. We're sampling data 40 million times a second.
A second?
40 million times a second. And we ended up with close to 40 terabytes of data.
Wow.
Okay, that's a lot of data. And even with modern computers, it takes a while to process that.
Do you have in your computer or in front of you, do you have any kind of a really clear radar image?
Well, yes, of course. However, the formal way that the JPL asks us to release through our media relations office. And so we coordinate everything with them and make sure that we're following appropriate protocols and all that sort of thing. And so that's what we've done with the images that have come out and the animations that have come out so far. And so we're going to obviously follow NASA protocols for anything else that we would put out as well.
Well, I'm looking at the photograph that was released from November 7th, 2011. This was a photograph before the November 8th closest pass of YU55 between the moon and the Earth. It looks sort of bulbous and what looks like a depression further toward the middle. There is also some white material that seems to cross where the depression is. I wondered how much more clear are your newest radar images now?
The thing that you asked about possibly being a depression, it's not entirely clear if that is. It might well be. It's certainly a dark feature as seen in the radar. There are a couple of possible explanations for it. It could be a topographic depression. It could simply be a slight change in the slope of the local surface. And to really understand what's going on there, we need to do the full three-dimensional shape reconstruction.
Dr. Benner?
Yes.
Why is it that YU55 continues to come so close in between the Earth and the Moon and Venus and this part of the solar system?
Well, its orbit around the sun is such that it just happens to come by the Earth it came by this year. It'll come by the Earth again in the 2040s. It'll go by Venus very closely in 2029, then the Earth again in 2075. It has somehow gotten into this kind of orbit around the sun that enables it to do this. When it encounters one of these planets, it gets a gravitational nudge in the process that undoubtedly plays some role in all of this. But how it got into this configuration, we don't know.
I wondered if you have a perspective from your years of studying asteroids about this question. Could an asteroid in the half-mile diameter range end up suddenly emerging in the solar system in a way that could impact the Earth? I'm thinking of the Chicxulub crater event 65 million years ago. Is that possible in this day and age for any asteroid large enough to do damage to surprise you in the asteroid science community?
Is it possible? It probably still is. I can't give you a formal probability, what the chances are of that sort of thing. If that were to happen, it would likely be a scenario similar to what happened with YU55 just recently. YU55 was discovered 6 years ago, so we knew it was coming. But there is certainly a blind spot in the direction of the sun. So if there's something from the direction of the sun, right now we won't see it until it's gone by. The search efforts that are underway, optical telescopes, don't look very close to the sun because they can't in order to protect their equipment. So there's a very small chance that something this size could approach from that distance. We think that there are still at least several thousand objects in a similar size range to 2005 YU55, 400 meters, about the size of the Empire State Building. We think that there's still several thousand of those yet to be discovered. The search efforts are finding a lot of them, and they're finding them pretty efficiently. But it will take many years at the current rate of discovery to sweep up all of them. Mm-hmm. So, yes, there's a probability. I don't know what it is. I suspect it's actually fairly small. The chance of something hitting us of that size range is very remote. The timescales over which that happens are really quite long. I don't remember the precise number, but I think it's on the order of hundreds of thousands of years on average between impacts from something that big. It's much more likely that something the size of a house or a bus would hit the atmosphere. Like that small object that plunged into the atmosphere over North Africa in the fall of 2008. That's the kind of thing that's much more likely. An object that might be a few meters or maybe 10 meters across. Things like that hit much, much more frequently. Something this big, although they do hit occasionally, the interval over which they do is quite long, and it's very, very likely that we will find all of them before they happen to find us.
Well, it's not a matter of if, I think, but when. Linda comes back in just a moment and talks about an incredible Ontario, Canada UFO case on Coast to Coast AM. Up next, Linda Moulton Howe reports on some strange objects near Ontario, Canada. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norton. Now, you might remember the Stephenville, Texas UFO case back in 2008. Well, Linda has uncovered something that could be pretty darn similar near Ontario in Canada, and here she is back on Coast to Coast. Linda, what is this story?
Well, that's right, George. Remember when I went down to Stephenville, Texas in January of 2008, and I was investigating multiple eyewitness reports of silent, brightly glowing aerial objects that projected colorful patterns in the night sky. And in fact, there was even a videotape of one of these discs projecting three-dimensional patterns for 11 minutes. Well, since January of 2008, I have received and reported at earthfiles.com and on Coast to Coast about the photographs and interviews that I have gotten from people who are in, and this is just some of them, Oswego, Illinois, Kokomo, Indiana, Reno, Nevada, Empire, Ohio, Elmwood and Plum City, Wisconsin, Beaver Creek, Oregon, Freiburg, Maine, and now Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. That is a wide geographic spread. And when you go to Earth Files, in the part one of this three-part, I'm actually going to do a fourth part now, but three parts that exist at Earth Files, the very first one shows you dozens and dozens of these images in all these geographic areas so that you can see how similar it all is. And on November 24th, I got an email from a Kitchener resident named Greg Crane, and he wrote, I listen to you on Coast to Coast AM, and it sounds like I'm seeing the same thing that you have talked and reported about. I have many pictures of this, about 800 of them, taken with a Kodak digital camera mounted to a telescope on a tripod. And he has sent me an image that I got tonight, and I will add to my report, that shows how he attaches his Kodak Easy Share through a tube to this telescope, and it's been working very well. The camera does not move. And on this issue, when people say, oh, this is just stabilization issues with digital cameras, I have a whole section in part 3 of my long dialogues with a tech support person at Canon, because Canon has been used by a professional photographer in Kitchener, who says flat out that the images that I've sent him and looked at have nothing to do with any kind of stabilization or white balance or shutter issues, that we're talking about some kind of objective phenomena that is very, very mysterious and not understandable. Well, Greg Crane has lived most of his 44 years in Kitchener, Ontario, so he's very familiar with everything there, the sky, the environment, and he now works restoring antique cars and has a home and an office for 18 years that's near the top of the hill, but not on top of the hill, so he has very clear views of the west, the south, and the north. It's the east that he can't see. Beginning in the summer of 2009, Greg Crane and some of his friends noticed near sunset in the still blue sky a very bright silver star was changing colors. And after that, he realized he could see 3 of these stars. If he went out in his car on the road, he could see one to the blocked off east that he can't see from his house, and one that would be north and one that usually would be south, or making some variation on that pattern. He realized there's 3 of these making this pattern near him. And then when he began to finally get this camera going on the tripod, he realized that he also was photographing red, blue, and green smaller objects, also forming a triangle in tandem with the large triangle. Here now is Greg Crane from Kitchener, Ontario, Canada.
First noticed it, there was a bunch of us standing in a parking lot at Tim Hortons, which is a coffee shop, having a coffee one night, and somebody had pointed out this twinkling star in the sky that changes all different colors. The more I was outside at the times that the sun was going down, the more I noticed it.
What was the very first thing that you saw when you looked through the telescope and the camera?
A round object, star-like, changing multiple colors. And it was hard to keep it center of the telescope because it was moving. In the daytime, it looks like a silver star, and it's much bigger. And this is out an hour before any of the other stars. I started noticing its flight path. It came out pretty consistent times, took the same flight path, and disappeared approximately at the same time.
Describe the flight path from where to where.
It would show up before it got dark, about the height of the cell tower, would come across the sky, and it would make a right-hand turn and then disappear to the horizon, away from me. The other one, which is about 33 degrees from it, it comes out and it would stay stationary. It would appear, and then it would just get smaller until it disappeared. Now, there's also a third one that makes a complete triangle. The third one, though, unless I drive somewhere, I can't see it because I have buildings and trees and stuff that block the view of it. There's times that I've seen the one that's by the cell tower and not the other one. There's times I've seen the other one and not the one by the cell tower. Majority of the time, they're out at the same time, but not always.
Is there any difference in the behavior with the colors between the one that comes in from the west and the one that is to your south?
No, if I take pictures of them, they're exactly the same. They have the dots, they have the same erratic movements, the same shapes. Once I take the pictures, I can't even really tell which pictures are from which one.
And the erratic movement, your camera and telescope are locked off on a tripod, is that correct?
Yes.
So when you do a time lapse, for example, the two longest exposures, and one looks like a bunch of yarn, there is so much movement in that frame. Your camera was locked off, and whatever that object was doing was making all of those colorful lines in that shutter speed.
Yes. Now, if you blow that picture up to the original 100%, you'll see stars and stuff in the background. And if it was the camera moving or the telescope moving, anything in the background would have the same erratic movement. And the stuff in the background doesn't have that.
Were you seeing lights projected at any time away from the round object?
Not the first pictures. Later on, the more time I spent watching it and taking pictures, then I would see lights coming in and out of it, especially the red dot, because the red shows up against the sky better.
What is your own intuitive sense of what the red, green, and blue dots are?
My personal feeling is I think they're either gathering some kind of information. Like how we send a probe to Mars, those are the probes that are going out, maybe taking samples of the atmosphere, maybe taking pictures. I think they're doing whatever work that object is doing. The one photo I sent you, if you blow it up, it does resemble your stereotypical UFO.
This shows like a horseshoe.
After the horseshoe, it comes back down. You see it has a red and yellow flash of light, and then it starts going off on its own. At the end of the trail, to me, looks like your typical UFO, saucer-shaped with a dome on top. The other thing, it's below high cloud. The low rainy cloud, it's above it, but it's below the high cloud. It's not out in space.
You are seeing a light that appears to be flashing colors. You're not seeing what we see in the photos that look like the traces of symbols.
No, that only shows up on film. It does not look like that when I'm looking. It's just a dot that's flashing all different colors and moving around. But on film, it has the symbols, like the trail behind it.
Have you had any intuitive sense about what it is?
I personally think that it's something that is anti-gravity propulsion. Now, from my understanding of gravity, very similar to electricity. Electricity has pulses and waves. Gravity, let's say, has pulses and waves, and I could be wrong. If you had a craft that worked off the gravity field of the Earth, repelling and attracting, and that's, let's say, how it flew, you are sitting in that craft, you would not be bouncing around because you're in your own gravitational field, just like when planet Earth is going through space, we don't feel the hiccups and speed bumps of space because we're in our own atmosphere, our own gravitational pull. If this is the same thing, and for it to stay somewhat stationary, like to hover, it basically is riding the gravitational waves of the Earth. And when it goes to accelerate or take off, it either attracts or repels the gravity of Earth.
Do you think these are non-human technologies?
My gut feeling is I do think they're alien.
Why?
Well, especially with the erratic movements, if there's something human inside it, I don't think any human would survive that kind of erratic movements.
They could be unmanned drones.
That's a possibility. But I do think that we are being observed and visited. If you take a look at any ancient cultures and ancient history, it seems like there was an alien interference. And my opinion is, whichever happened thousands of years ago, it's like, okay, you guys can look after yourself, but we're coming back. and we want to see what mess you made. And I pretty much think that we made a pretty good mess. So they're watching, making a plan, getting ready to come back. And what happens when they come back? No idea.
And what do you suppose these projected three-dimensional multicolored symbols are doing? What is the purpose?
Trying to communicate.
With whom?
With us, or maybe even with each other. Maybe they're not trying to communicate with us. Maybe they're trying to communicate to something that's, sitting on Mars looking down at us. If they have the technology for interstellar travel, if they have the technology to do pretty much anything that we would like to do, can't, then you'd think that they would have the technology to be able to translate English or any language and communicate somehow. Back in 1993, when I first purchased this house in Kitchener, this would be end of November. We were doing some work outside to a building that is now my shop in the backyard of the house, and me and three other friends of mine witnessed what we thought originally was a falling star or a meteorite. We seen it come in the atmosphere, and then it curved. And then when the light disappeared, there was three sets of three black triangles went right overhead, and they would be no more than 500 feet in the air, and dead quiet and very fast. But they made absolutely no noise.
And all four of you see what you think is a falling star, a meteor in the sky.
Yes.
What color was it?
Bright yellow.
And that bright yellow, is it a long, slow-moving light?
Yes. And then it started to curve.
Curved like away from you or toward you?
Towards us. Well, I've never seen a meteor curve. And when the meteor went out, like you couldn't see the flames or the light anymore, then, we were still looking at it, and then these things flew overhead.
9 triangles in groups of 3 in a pattern of a triangle.
Yes. You could really see detail.
Like what? What detail were you seeing on the bottoms of the 3 triangles?
They were satin black, but you could definitely make out the shape, like as if you were standing like an airplane that flew over 500 feet. You'd see the curve of the belly. You would see very detailed shape of them.
Could you see lines or rivets or anything?
Nope. We discussed that afterwards. Whatever they were made of, they were stamped out of one piece.
Like molded?
Yes.
The triangle, could you see any lights in the vertices of the triangles?
No, they were dark, and they blacked out the natural light of the sky. That's actually what made them show up, was the fact that they were so dark against stars, bright moon. You could definitely see 3 sets of 3 very dark, not flat black, but not shiny black, satin black triangles.
And they are moving in a line or abreast of each other?
The 3 sets of 3 were also in the shape of a triangle. Like you would have 3 out front, and then 2 groups of 3 behind, but beside each other.
You could see stars in between?
Oh, yeah, you could see the sky in between, because these were black, and the sky was very, very, very dark blue.
Is there any question in your mind that yellow moving light that you first thought was a meteor actually deposited those 9 triangles in the sky?
Yeah, I believe so. My thoughts were that they were alien.
Did you try to call police or an airport or anyone to say, this is what I just saw? What are those 9 triangles? Where are they from?
No, because people that report stuff like that are considerably ridiculed.
Which is so wrong and upside down.
True, it is. How can you not want to know, not that you can do anything about it. I mean, if I found out tomorrow that, it's either man-made or alien, it's not like I can do anything about it. How can you not want to know?
Exactly.
Like, how could you just walk away and go, yeah, we're being watched by aliens. Oh, look at that, they're shooting at each other. Oh, look at that. Oh, well, geez, they're coming. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
How can you ignore it?
That's a great story, Linda.
It is, and it continues to evolve. It seems like now almost every day there is a professional photographer in Kitchener named Terry White, and on December 1st, he took his Canon EOS 5D Mark II camera, very sturdy tripod, a very good lens that could go out to 422 millimeters, and he took 3 long exposures. Well, one of them was 30 seconds, another one was about 3 seconds, and another was 6. But they are 3 quite remarkable images. And in one of them, it looks like a neon tube in parallel with star tracks. And this is the 30-second exposure. And then coming out of the lower end of this tube is an undulating thing that has a round object at the end of it. And because there is this issue in the modern digital camera about stabilization. In some of the high-end cameras, there are buttons you can shut the stabilization off if you want. In a lot of the smaller, more civilian-accessible cameras, you can't shut it off. And most of the manuals for these cameras, exactly like Greg Crane's Kodak EasyShare, it says, place your camera on a tripod when you are in dimmer light, which is what he has done. And the issue, though, has been, could all of these images in all of these locations since January of 2008 be some phenomenon of stabilization in digital cameras? Well, I went to Canon because the professional photographer Terry White's camera is this Canon EOS 5D.
Okay, well, smart.
And
good.
I had a long, bless this Canon technical expert. He was wonderful, and he said, looking at all the 3 images by Terry White, looking at 3 of the complicated, multiple-colored, 3-dimensional images that Greg has photographed. Here is first what he said about the Terry White images, which everyone watching, I urge you to go to Part 3, Earth Files. The whole front top is in you can see the wide, you can see cropped, you can see all the details, the camera specs, everything about these remarkable images over Kitchener. And here is what the Canon technical support technician said, that the longer exposures in a camera mounted on a tripod would not be significantly affected by stabilization. In fact, he said in Canon equipment, stabilization operating in tripod-mounted cameras would be slight and might produce blurry focus. He associates blurry focus with the Canon process more than anything else, and says this would definitely apply to both of these situations if Terry White is on a sturdy tripod and Greg Crane has been using tripod. And further, he said, in the 30-second exposure image 038, the bright object is paralleling the star field, and there is no camera stabilization explanation for the undulating trail that ends in a roundish object. Something moved from the bright object and was captured in that 30-second exposure, close quote.
That's a great report again, Linda. You're right on top of things this week. When we come back, Roswell. You know the name, but wait till you hear the story.